Moki, Naganago Mekoche Chestakomaki. Hello, everybody. I'm Michelle. I'm really glad that you came to Chapters in Chat Book Club. Today, we're talking about Brandi Morin's Our Voice of Fire, and I'd like to start off by acknowledging that we're on Niitsitapi lands. These lands have been taken care of by the Blackfoot forever. They've had treaty with different folks, including the Dene, for forever. And that's why there was a small bit of Dene here when Treaty 7 was signed in 1877. So I want to start by acknowledging the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Gunnies, Siksika, Kainai, and south of the border, the Blackfeet Nation. And then in 1877, Tsuut'ina Dene, as well as Stoney Nakoda, signed treaty with the Crown, making us all treaty partners. So that if you are a non-Indigenous person, the treaty was signed on your behalf, and you are a treaty partner with legal obligations to honor those treaties. I always acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. And yeah, let's get started. So today in Calgary, in Mohkinstsis, it's stupidly hot. It's 32, feels like it's 40 in this room that I'm in. My brother's taking up my basement right now, so normally I'd be nice and cool, have this wet cloth on me, but I don't know how long it's going to stay wet. So maybe we'll do a little round of introductions so that everyone can get to know each other. But in order to create a safe space, I will happily pause the recording for anybody throughout this entire session. Just let me know. And then yeah, and that will go on my podcast for folks who missed our book club or just kind of want to listen in and didn't get a chance to read it. So I am going to open this up a bit. I'm just trying to figure out who's first. I'll bet you it's Carol. Carol, we'll go Carol, Kat, Paul, Shelley, and then Siri, and I'll pause it for Siri.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm Carol. I live on native land. It's Treaty 7, and it's my privilege to be part of this book club, and it's a continual learning process. And Michelle, I love those earrings. I love that work. I had to say it.
Hi, I'm Kat. I am a white settler born on Treaty 1 territory, currently residing on Treaty 7 here. So I am a treaty partner. I acknowledge that and am work to be a good one. And my pronouns are she, her, they, them. I am always grateful to be here and to learn from you all.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm a white settler in Western Michigan. It's the land of the Ottawa people. Thank you again for the opportunity to join you. If I get a chance this evening, I wanted to tell you about my last weekend trip up to Wawa country in Ontario and the red dresses that we saw hanging on the trees and the fences. Thank you.
I'm Shelley. I am a settler who has been all her life on Treaty 7. I also have, yeah, I think that's about enough for today.
Welcome, Rosemary. We were just doing some introductions for folks who may not know each other, so we'll just invite you to introduce yourself in your way.
Okay, am I muted? Okay, you can hear me. Okay, so I'm Rosemary. I'm a white settler of European ancestry, born and raised on the traditional lands of the Onondaga Nation in upstate New York, and I've lived here in Mohkinstsis on Treaty 7 land for over 45 years now. And I've been with the book club almost, not since the beginning, but almost since the beginning. And I really appreciate it. It's made a big difference in terms of understanding, not just reading the books, but listening to Michelle and everyone else in the group. So thank you.
I'm so grateful for all of you. It is ridiculously hot in Calgary. There's a million things I'm sure all of you would rather be doing. So I'm just really honored to hang out with you all. And I said this at the Reconciliation Action Group get together that, you know, it's like chosen family. So just happy to, you know, be with people who want to talk about these things. So, so our selection for today, Brandi Morin's Our Voice of Fire, memoir of a warrior rising. Brandi Morin is an internationally recognized French Cree Iroquois journalist known for her clear-eyed and empathetic reporting on Indigenous oppression in North America. As a survivor of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls crisis, she uses her voice to shed light on and seek justice for those who have not survived the rampant violence. Our Voice of Fire moves through Morin's years as a foster kid and runaway who fell victim to predatory men and an oppressive system, to her career as an internationally acclaimed journalist, chronicling her journey to overcome enormous adversity and find her purpose and her power through writing. Morin's compelling, honest story is full of heart and faith and driven by a purifying fire of the pursuit of justice. And yeah, a beautiful book. So I love this artwork that she has a little write-up in the back about, well, she has some acknowledgements and talks about the artwork here. The painting represents a woman singing her new song. Before she receives a new song, she provides a tobacco offering and prayer. Then ceremony begins, which takes place in a quiet, still, peaceful solitude. In taking the time to sit in solitude, she renews her capacity to see, hear, feel, and receive what the Creator sends to her. When the woman has completed her seeking and sensing, she receives her song. With the songs comes a drumbeat rhythm, words, and instructions for the song's purpose, whether it be for healing, war, or celebration. This image is the first time she is singing the song, a solo that has been gifted to her by Creator. And the person who wrote that is Sherioth Marsden, who draws on her Anishinaabe roots and knowledge of woodland art to create a unique work of diverse arts. This includes paintings at large and small scales, jewelry, and beadwork. She is known for her bent wood box titled "To Honor Our Indigenous Veterans," held in a collection of the Vancouver Museum. She is a graduate of Vancouver's Northwest Coast Jewelry Arts Program under established artist Haida and something else artist Dan Wallace. Marsden has also worked with artists Richard. Anyway, they live in the interior of BC and where they practice and teach. So that's a little bit about the art in front as well. So yeah, in our book club, we generally have Indigenous people speak first. I don't see anybody who identifies as Indigenous other than I do. So I guess I did read the book, despite, for folks who don't know, my mother-in-law passed away. So I didn't think I was going to read this book, but it was a super easy, quick read. So it was easy for me to polish it off. And I just polished it off a couple hours ago, actually. And I thought it's important as somebody who claims to be a liberal and someone who works with the Liberal Party of Canada, that I read page 193, where she was talking in the section about a pipeline and the pipeline, how it was affecting her also in Texas. So anyway, I'm just going to read this little bit. It wasn't just paranoia. There was a lot of money at stake and many powerful people who did not want this story out. The pipeline is now owned by the Canadian government. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau bought it in 2018 after Kinder Morgan pulled the plug due to uncertainty. This state-owned multi-billion-dollar pipeline has a lot of powerful stakeholders. Although Justin Trudeau has claimed that his number one priority is reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada, his actions have proved otherwise when it comes to upholding Indigenous rights. He has demonstrated time and time again that he advances reconciliation only on his terms, only when it suits him. He still allows Indigenous peoples to be forcibly removed from their lands. Such was the case with the Trans Mountain development and the Wet'suwet'en crisis. He even brought in army troops to raid the Unistoten Wet'suwet'en camps more than once to violently remove Indigenous opposition. To Justin Trudeau, I say this: respecting Indigenous rights has to happen on all fronts, not just when it makes a good photo opportunity or helps to get votes. And I thought it was important that I, out of all people, read that, because I'm always retweeting and amplifying Justin Trudeau, because I live in Calgary, Alberta, and people believe in conspiracy theories and stupidity. So of course I share his message a lot. But when it comes to Indigenous issues, obviously, I'm part of the Indigenous Peoples Commission, and I don't disagree, obviously, what she wrote. And I think it's important that, there's a difference between being a treaty partner and reconciliation. And I hear Justin talk all the time about reconciliation. And I think she really kind of said when it's convenient. And that's the problem. Treaty isn't about convenience. Treaty is a legal document. And until there is true equity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, there's no fulfillment of the treaty, right? And that needs to be seen as an obligation. Now, I honestly believe Justin Trudeau is the best prime minister we have seen up to this point in history when it comes to working with Indigenous people. So, and with the deepest respect to Jagmeet Singh, not seeing a really good, opposition or let's add to this or anything like that. The Conservatives are fucking out to lunch. So there's no even trying with those folks. So from my point of view, it's not that she's wrong at all. It's just that there is not a realization yet by the average Canadian about what treaty partnership is, let alone, what actual consent would be, consultation. And that needs to be a part of the reconciliation conversation 100%. And I don't think it's being fully realized by any capacity. So I just thought it was important for me to kind of point on that. The book overall, here is in my opinion, scared young woman with permanent childhood trauma, thanks to systemic racism by the Canadian government, with the apprehension system, intergenerational trauma, thanks to residential schools, and because she's part of the Michelle Band, intergenerational trauma of governance, and an attempt to eliminate her identity along with all of those from the Michelle Band. So there's a lot to unpack when it comes to this book, and I think it's a really vulnerable memoir that talks a lot about her failings and tries to end it a little more with some of her accomplishments. But at the end of the day, this is a scared little girl who was raped multiple times by predatory monsters, and it sucks. This is the experience for a lot of Indigenous women. And, because I'm going through a lot of the issues, I'm dealing with trauma from the past with a death in the family, just unpacking how much hate there is towards an Indigenous woman, and under the guise of whatever, and how much gaslighting and backstabbing and meanness comes from Canadian society and people who are supposed to be in a position of love and trust. So I just found it very interesting. I was reading this book while resurfacing a lot of the trauma of dealing with family members that clearly hate me, and for what? And I haven't gone through half of the trauma that she had to go through. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Our trauma is different. We have different trauma. So I know that she's really becoming an internationally known person now, and I'm really glad she was able to write a book. And I hope that the next book we see from her will be basically focusing on her work, as opposed to, unfortunately, all the trauma she's had to endure. I think it's important, though, to include it and have a book on just that, because that's the experience of Indigenous women in Canada, and how non-Indigenous women and non-Indigenous people don't see that. Like, I don't understand that. And I just want to invite Paul to, when he does have a chance to speak, maybe we'll go in the same order of Carol, Kat, Paul, Rosemary, Shelley, and then I'll pause it for our last guest, and we'll just talk about it in that way. And yeah, and I invite you all to, share what you'd like to share. I just think it's really important that we also mention in this moment that we have two camps, Camp Mercedes, Camp Morgan, that are in Winnipeg right now, trying to get the governments to work on searching these landfills. And because we're all in Calgary, and most of you have been with me with the Joey English, death, pointing out again that Joey English is partly in the landfills here in Calgary. And the sooner we have a national action plan, the better. But the irony to that is that even me saying those words is, I know if this was non-Indigenous people, there would be no question, there would be no, this would be done. But because it's Indigenous people, it hasn't been done. And that's, if that doesn't show racism in Canada in 2023, I don't know what does, right? So, and Brandi speaks throughout this about how she feels this could have been her. And it could very well could be her, just like it could be any Indigenous woman in this country. It could be me tomorrow. That's just a reality. It could be my daughter, could be so many Indigenous people who won't even acknowledge their indigeneity, who won't acknowledge racism, systemic racism. It could be anyone. So, yeah. So with that, I will pass it over to, I said Carol, Kat. Anyway, alphabetically.
Thank you, Michelle. I did read the book, and I think I agree with you. I should say first, my condolences to you. The book is an easy read, and she makes very complex things easy to understand. It was like this, it's like when I read these books, I feel like I'm on this emotional roller coaster. And I feel like if I feel like this, what did she feel? And she's lived like 10 lives in just this period of time that she's been on the earth. I think that the trauma and she builds herself up, and she starts to make progress, and then an old pattern revisits, and then she just gets sick, and she goes into hospital, and then all of the treatments associated with that, I don't know that they're irrelevant. They are, speak to me, ECT speaks to me as being having no other options that the hospital would offer her, but she needed something else. She needed, and it's basically a criticism of our white ethnocentric healthcare. She needed something else, and it wasn't available to her. But somehow she kind of gets herself through all of this, and she does it through her religion, which she feels conflicted about, and she talks about the difficulties in her relationships and the transgenerational patterns and losing her children, and it's just incredible. And I think we've read so many of these books. If I was a researcher, and I do that, I would look and I would say, I have read all of these books. Every book is saying the same thing. This is a sample that is a significant sample. The data, therefore, has meaning. And I was thinking about this, and I thought, what will it take before this data has full meaning? Like, you could read these books. I'm sure there's 1, 10, 100 printed in every province in Canada by some Indigenous writer. And we could, if everybody read it, the data would have meaning. Do you follow what I mean there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, very complicated life, but she makes it simple, and her journalism gets her through, and she's given opportunity, and then this opportunity falls away, and then she builds herself. And I thought, she just is in this process all the time of rebuilding, and she doesn't get cut slack. And so my hope is that at this point in her life, things have leveled off for her. I don't know if they have. They seem to have, but I don't know.
Thanks, Carol. Kat, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for choosing this book as well. I follow Brandi on Twitter, so it was really wonderful to read about her whole life story. I really appreciated her honesty and just putting it all out there, exactly what happened in a clear and poetic way. Because she is a writer, and a lovely one at that too. Congratulations to her for being getting her own byline on BBC News. That was wonderful to see as well. I was a wee bit surprised to read she had worked with Danielle Smith. That was kind of an interesting paragraph, and where she relates like, oh, Danielle was this wonderful shining example of whatever, and then politics, of course, got in the way and proves exactly how, you know, people's real character comes out. Anyway, I'm babbling, and Carol said a lot of the things that I thought as well, so I will pass it along.
Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to read the book, but I wanted to attend tonight to tell you about my experience with our family, our annual trip up to Wawa, Ontario. It's about 5 hours north of where we live. And I had a couple of questions. So we saw many dresses, red dresses, on the local fences and trees, some of which were full length, some of which were children's dresses. And I wanted to ask, they definitely got my family's attention, and they didn't know anything about them. So I wanted to ask if they have the same thing throughout the country, what the origin was, and if it's been effective.
Well, maybe I'll have everybody answer this in their way. You know, from my point of view as an Indigenous woman, we regularly ask people to put out red dresses to honor our missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. And so very rarely do settlers do a fucking thing. Like, seriously, it makes me want to, I talked about writing a book, and I would basically call it Fuck You, Canada, because of how I feel about how Canada doesn't respond when we ask them, will you do X, Y, and Z? And they don't. So for somebody to put up those dresses, I suspect it was Indigenous people who put it up, not settlers, because settlers very rarely do that. And it is absolutely a call across North America, right? Because the border was placed on us rather than us acknowledging that border. So lots of folks in the States now are starting to use, you're going to see the red hand on the mouth, as well as those red dresses to, you know, showcase that, to showcase our issue that we're trying to raise awareness to. And the folks in the States are just starting to do that work as well. So my hope is that, you know, more Canadians start getting it and start showing that solidarity on days we ask them to put that up. I mean, they're pretty normal days, like May 5th is Red Dress Day. Valentine's Day, we put them up. For October 4th, we put them up. Right, these dates are pretty standard for us. So, and then of course, when something happens, like the Search the Landfill, where we ask people to put up the red dress, you know, I can drive around my neighborhood and not see a single red dress. I know that. So, you know, I could drive all around Calgary. I would have to really, it would be really hard to find a single red dress put up anywhere. And then 100% of the time, it's going to be a Native person who did put it up.
You're right. They're up on specific date and if there's an incident.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if any of the settlers in the group have anything to add to that. You're welcome to.
They should be up 365, in my opinion.
And I
And I
guess,
endeavor to do it on special dates.
and I guess the thing is that you seeing them and having a feeling about them and having an awareness of them is the entire point of it. And when we see that, we need to pay attention to it. We need to do a little bit of research, our own personal research around that, and then what it means to us and what we would do. And so I'll buy a red dress.
There is. I don't know if you can see it, but I took a couple of the pictures. You know what they look.
Nice. Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up and mentioning it because, you know, you're part of this book club, so I think it's really important that you know and you were able to educate your family and others because, we say it, and then our settlers, they can't even like reshare it, right? They won't even acknowledge it. So like our treaty partnership is so poor. That's like I said, if I was to write a book, it would be "Fuck you, Canada." So.
Well, it was very effective. The other question I had is, we were in a camp and there was a couple there, a couple of young women, one of whom is a policy analyst for the federal government of Canada. And I wish I had had an opportunity to speak more with her, but I didn't. But it sounded like her job is to write, she said she was an economics major and it's an economics position, talk about data collection, to collect the data for the federal government about things like the tar sands and oil and gas exploration and the pipelines. And I'm assuming that meant things like how many jobs are created, how many jobs are lost. But what I really wanted to ask her, but we were all kind of on vacation, my wife said, don't get involved in it. But whether any of you have had conversations or thought of in terms of policy or procedure of having conversations with the policy analysts, because that's a really powerful position. They're the ones that are collecting the data that governments and businesses are making decisions with. And if the data only includes things like X number of jobs were created, or if so-and-so got laid off, or here are the employment benefits, they're missing so much of the story. What about the data about people's lives and about health and about justice? And can you put a value on it? Is that even a kosher thing to say, is put a value on a life? Is there a way of valuing it in the policy analysis that is going to decision makers that brings it into a topic of conversation?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of conversation happening about, the economic losses with our deaths, etc. Even right now, there's a call out from the Stoney Nation here in Treaty 7 to the federal government to help with the amount of deaths that are happening from the drug crisis. Interesting because my mother-in-law just died. It turns out every Canadian who pays into CPP has an opportunity, if they paid in the CPP the last 3 years of their life, any amount, they are eligible for a $2,500 death benefit, which, by the way, the cheapest cremation that does not cover. And I just found that interesting because I thought how many status natives probably never contribute to CPP in the last 3 years of their life. And would they be eligible for that $2,500, etc. So anyway, the chief is asking for federal assistance for $250,000 to bury all of the people dying from the drug crisis. And it's interesting because we talk about immigration and the need to bring in newcomers and to help our economy and to, help with jobs that people, that employers want filled but can't find enough people for, but they never go on reserve and they never offer jobs to Indigenous or people with disabilities. We have enough people here. They just, they want that, uneducated, ignorant slave labor is what they really want. That's probably a better way to put it. So a new immigrant comes and works so hard to try to fit in. And that's it's really deplorable. But at the end of the day, when you talk about economics, we should actually do a book on Indigenous economics. I'll try to fit that into my 2024 so we can talk more about that. With the deepest respect, lots of reports on it, lots of books on it, just a lack of giving a shit by policy analysts like the one you vacationed with, frankly, because in Canada and the US, it's still segregated. The concept of inclusion is not included in their university degree. I have met, some of the strongest PhDs in the country, and they know nothing about Indigenous people, absolutely nothing. Even since reconciliation, so-called TRC report, and so-called changes in a lot of the educational formats, like we're actually seeing it worsen right now. We're seeing a lot of attacks on Indigenous people, our thoughts, our ideas, and a way to steal it. I personally have had interactions with people here at the University of Calgary that are deplorable. And, these are the people that other folks look up to. So, I don't have a lot of faith in our policy analysts. And yes, I agree. That's why I'm part of the Indigenous Peoples Commission, because we're supposed to put forward policy for the Liberal Party of Canada, but they have very small paradigms that we're allowed to do that within. And their policy analysis, especially the ones hired by the government, are not allowed even to interact with folks like me. So it's that's the state of Canada, the US, and policy. It's lack of willpower from our leaders. And I shouldn't even say that. It's the fascism that was imposed with colonialism is really what it is. They don't want us here. You talk about economics. Sooner that we can be eliminated as a people, the sooner Canadians can feel good about stealing our resources and land, right? So I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Thank you for letting me digress from the book itself. I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I think it's important. And actually, while you brought it up, we should talk about, I talk about imposed poverty on Indigenous women. I really think this book kind of throughout it showed the struggles that Indigenous women have with with having a stable foundation to have a career, first and foremost. The lack of childcare that was available for her as a single mom, the lack of mental health supports, even though she is a God-fearing Christian, the lack of Indigenous inclusion in her healing path and journey, which she found on her own, and she did that work by herself, as we are all forced to do. So I hope that this book also kind of highlights that economic oppression that the Canadian government has forced on Indigenous women. And I hope that this book kind of gives a light on that as well. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to anything I'm saying and maybe answer anything Paul asked. Yeah, just unmute yourself, Carol.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I just wanted to make mention to him about Stats Canada. Stats Canada collects data, and that data informs policy, but they do not collect data on Indigenous women.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you have to collect the data before you can even do a policy. And both Michelle and I, we've both been on policy committees, and we know the onerous task of trying to develop a policy, submit it, have it rejected, rewrite it, and over again, to the point that it isn't even your policy anymore or your resolution. But the issue is Stats Canada. They do not collect data on Indigenous women because you're not part of a certain part of the, you have to be a certain number of the population, and they won't do it.
Yeah, I know we have a huge hole when it comes to data collection for Two-Spirit for the same reason. So very frustrating, very upsetting, and but done on purpose. Like, let's not kid ourselves, right? Like, this is what colonialism 101 is. So
I also was thinking that, from what my experience is that a lot of the politicians and policy analysts are looking for confirmation bias. They aren't looking for something that that is brilliant what Michelle says and something that's needed. They're just looking for confirmation bias, and they're just looking for what they want so that they can do what they want. So they find they found the person on that topic that says what they want them to say instead of what needs to be said.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I'm just going to pause it for 1 second. I think it is really important to bring up about the symbology. So for the red handprint over someone's face, for a lot of us who are actually Indigenous women, we don't even like it because it's, it's very violent. And we had one particular person who, these are really graphic details, and the last memories they have of one of their Indigenous female loved ones included bloody handprints all over the crime scene and all over them. And so for a lot of Indigenous women and our families, it's actually really triggering. And yet it's become kind of, you know, a lot of us who are actually doing vigils and family members or supporting family members, we see, young natives trying to raise awareness by doing the red handprint on their social media, but they've never, they've never been to a vigil. They've never talked to other family members. And it's really important that you kind of meet everybody where they're at. And for a lot of people, they don't want to see red handprints. And I know I don't. But some people have chosen that's their symbology, and you'll see it on some of our dresses and such. And it is what it is. We have to work with what we got. But the red dress, any red dress will do, frankly. And I should bring up the Manitoba Premier. She wore a red dress pin on one of the news outlets here to talk about whatever the fuck she was going to talk about. And I was so angered by it. I was like, I would happily take that assault charge. She has no business wearing that pin when she herself are oppressing the very families looking for answers in the landfills that she refuses to search. And I will bring up, like, Brandi Morin was kind of calling out to Justin Trudeau. And I know that the Liberal government claims they would happily work with all orders of government on that. But to kind of bring up Brandi's point, it's easy to say those things, but at the end of the day, it's not being done. So are they reaching out? Are they sending messages to the Premier? Are they talking to, the local municipality about getting that work done? Because it's easy to say in the media, in a tweet, oh my God, we are so in support of MMIW and we would support those families. Oh, if you're not actually doing any work, and I should, I've been meaning to say this too. Josie Nipanak is a local Indigenous leader here. She was the executive director of Auton Healing Lodge for years, decades, until she retired. And her niece, Tanya Nipanak, is in those Winnipeg landfills too, just as Joey English is in the Calgary ones, right? So we know there's even more bodies, actually. It happened a long time ago, so I don't know if that will ever be recoverable. But the point is that in Canada, it seems to be socially acceptable to have schools with little kids' graves around it, as well as our Indigenous bodies in landfills. And everybody's A-okay with it because the economy and the next quarter earnings, inflation, let's talk about those things instead of, morals, ethics, love. That kind of thing. So yeah, I hope that kind of helps you, because I've actually had the Calgary police ask me the same thing about, wearing orange shirts, pins, and red dresses. And I think it's highly inappropriate. They've never apologized, and they haven't done systemic changes for them to earn wearing those, frankly. At least they've apologized to the 2S LGBTQ community before they put on these like rainbow, pieces on their uniform. But regardless, they've never apologized to us for their horrific crimes against us. And there's never been accountability. And I would argue until there is some sort of accountability, it would be inappropriate for police force to be wearing orange shirts or red dresses. And I said, I said, I want you to imagine one of our homeless people who are homeless literally because of systemic racism, because of intergenerational trauma, because of the 60 scoop, because of Indian residential schools, and you're throwing them in jail wearing an orange shirt. Like, does that sound ridiculous? Because it sounds ridiculous to me, right? So like, I think there is a responsibility when talking about symbology and these things and what they mean, that, you know, you are doing action. And kind of back to our friend who was talking there while we had it paused, you know, if you're not working on systemic changes, you're not part of the solution. You shouldn't really be wearing something when you're still oppressing the very people you claim to be in solidarity with. So I don't know. Those are just my thoughts. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in before we move on to, I think we'll go Rosemary, Shelley, and then we'll pause. Rosemary, would you like to talk about the book from your point of view? So I know you've unpaused yourself, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
Yeah, it seems to be when I have my headphones in, people can't hear me. Sorry about that. We've had grandchildren and children moving in and out and doing things here. I'm over halfway through the book. I find it absolutely compelling. I'm really struck by her capacity to make herself vulnerable to others by sharing her story. And I think that's the point. That's why she did it. And I think she's tried to break down that wall between herself as a reporter or someone who investigates, and then the people she's interviewing and working with. You know, she's relating to them, right? As a human being, as opposed to being closed in and somehow other people are the objects and you question them, but you never share anything about yourself in your life. And I think the same goes for any researcher, you know, working with anyone. So I really admire her for that. And I think, I mean, we talk about intergenerational trauma and the cycles, but I think this is one of the clearest narratives in terms of just how that operates, because she talked so much about her kokum and her mom and her dad and then herself, and she just keeps, you know, making the point and drawing the connections, as you said, from residential school to the trauma to how people treated each other. And I mean, it's very hard to hear about, you know, the how on the, okay, what's hard is the part of relationships between people that keep falling apart and becoming dysfunctional and perhaps violent and abusive. And yet, on the other hand, it's so clear that there was a lot of love in this book and in this family from the different generations. And like she said, her parents loved each other, but they just, you know, because of all the baggage they brought, it just didn't work. And she found that in some of her own relationships. And even though, I mean, you know, it was her father, his initial reaction to her sharing that, you know, she was learning this little, sexy wuxy game, right, from this other 5-year-old. And without any discussion, he just creamed her and it just shattered her. And for her, that was the starting point of the anger, the defiance. And of course, she's reacting to everything around her. And yet later, I mean, it was her father and her mother who over and over again open their doors, drive miles to help her, and so that the love and the family connection and the support is so strong and so critical.
Yeah.
And I think people don't see that. They only see the dysfunction or the alcoholism, but not the strong bonds and the relationships. And so I think that then feeds into what we've been talking about, like the families of murdered and missing Indigenous women, and the whole thing, like the erasure of people, as human beings, that happens with Indigenous people, which you mentioned, Michelle. And another example I can remember when I first started working with the Lubka Nation in terms of solidarity work. After the road was put in from Peace River to Little Buffalo and beyond for oil development, then you've got a lot of traffic and cars, easy access to alcohol from Peace River. And there was a horrendous car accident where 6 young people died from the community. And do you know how their bodies were brought back to the community? In garbage bags. It's just like, so it's ongoing, the examples of what you've been talking about, of the dehumanization of people on the part of colonizers and other people. But again, I just found that, and we've seen that before, where strong family relationships, regardless of the dysfunction, have helped people to come through. So I'm anxious to finish the book and to see where it's at, and to echo Carol. It's also such a clear example of how it's not like you have a magic cure one day, right? You wake up and, oh, I'm fixed now. No, it's up and down and up and down. And she says herself, this isn't a fairy tale. This is real life. There are these swings back and forth. And there was another really important, there was a quote that really struck me. The reason, again, I'll end with this, but why she wanted to talk about this, because she felt for her, silence, she says silence is another form of violence, right? And it's how colonizers have erased us. So she's putting it all out there. So it's a very powerful book. That's it.
Thanks, Rosemary. I appreciate that. And I think we'll go Shelley, and then I'll pause it for a minute.
So I finished the book. I started it on last week, and I read right through it because it's not easy material, but she made it easy, like digestible and easier to read. Like her, I've struggled with my mental health for a long time. Different, but still struggled. And when she talks about the airplane and how to conquer some of those fears and phobias, it just kind of really hit home, of having to conquer fears and phobias and just get it, like, just do it. And I'm wondering if they had just listened to her in the first place and looked at trauma instead of trying to just drug her full of antipsychotics and antidepressants, if that would have helped. But that's the white Eurocentric, let's just deal with what's in front of us, and let's not look what's in the past. And even though that could have big implications on what's going on today, they're just in the acute cycle of just getting people out of the hospital. So I thought that it was really touching, and even though my journey was different, it just reminded me of certain things. I don't have much to say that hasn't been said.
All right. So one of the things that I thought we could go out with is this link that I put in the comment section. So I'm just going to share screen. I'm going to share sound and optimize for video and share this. All right. Let me get to where I need to now. So this was the link. And it started playing and I couldn't get it to shut up and pause. So I was like, this is the worst. So hopefully this will work really nice for us here. And please don't hesitate to unmute yourself if there's an issue. It's right now just loading and loading. I had it up, but I just couldn't get it to shut up and pause. So otherwise I would have kept it up. But it's basically her being interviewed. So hopefully this will come. There's still no sound yet.
The reporter
There we go.
isn't supposed to be part of the story. But for journalist Brandi Morin, there came a time when it was painfully clear that the story she was reporting on could just as easily have been about her. Devastating loss, abuse, oppression. But as her new memoir also reveals, strength, clarity, and the bravery to seek justice. It's called Our Voice of Fire, a memoir of a warrior rising. Brandi Morin is an internationally recognized French Cree Iroquois journalist, and she joins us now in our studio. It's so nice to meet you in person. This book, you know, before we came on camera, I said that there's a lot of things that you wrote about in here that are painful to talk about. So I just want you to know you don't have to go there if you don't want to. But you've worked for media outlets like APTN, the New York Times, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, National Geographic.
Ma'am.
You've shed light on so many people's stories through your reporting. So why did you decide to tell your own story in a memoir?
Yeah, so I've been telling these stories, like you said, for many years. And yes, this is an intimate story and it's a devastating story. But when I'm out there, telling these stories, people are sharing those intimate details with me. And they're sharing these truths with the world. And I thought, with the platform that I have as a journalist, I can also share those truths and to give back, to provide insight, because I think that a lot of times our people aren't humanitized in the media. And, I wanted to give, a look into the life of a survivor such as myself, because, I've been very moved and impacted by this genocide of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and visiting the home where Tina Fontaine was raised. For those that are unfamiliar with Tina Fontaine, she was 15 years old and her body was found dumped in the Winnipeg Red River. And I could have been her, and she could have been me. She could have been, a journalist for justice doing these big things. And so I thought, I wanted to bring attention, with these platforms that I had.
Well, you brought up Tina, and in the book you write about that meeting and how difficult it was for you to hold your emotions back. And I just want to read what you wrote in the book since you brought it up. You write, "Tina died, I survived. Tina died, I survived. I am her, she is me." I think it's safe to say that most of us would probably crawl into a fetal position, but you chose to use what happened to you as fuel. How were you able to do that?
Wow. I just, had this sense of fighting inside of me, like fighting to get out of that darkness that I was raised in and around. And I had this warrior spirit. There was just always this spark that there was something better. And so I found that through becoming a journalist, through a love of writing, through a love of people. And through doing what I do, it coincided with my own healing from the different traumas that I experienced, right? So it was just, it was a blessing in many ways.
Many parts of the book were hard to read, and I'm sure they were very difficult for you to write. What was it like to revisit some of the most traumatic experiences and painful memories that you went through?
So, believe it or not, revisiting and writing about my rape and escaping with my life wasn't the hardest part. Because,
What was the hardest part?
yeah, I mean, I've been in, in a healing journey for many years and going through therapy and different things. The hardest part for me was going back to when I was completely broken and unable to take care of my children and neglecting my children and having my children taken from me. Revisiting when my daughter Faith, my firstborn, was 4 months old and neglecting her, and the pain of revisiting how could I have done that. And I cried for days, remembering and going through those parts, and called my daughter Faith and, apologized and had this kind of beautiful full circle conversation with her, even though she doesn't remember anything, right? But that was the hardest for me. But I was also like so grateful because I was able to get my kids back. There's so many, of our children that are in the foster care system across this country, and the families aren't supported to get their children back, and so I also felt, very, very grateful.
I want to talk about the foster system in the country in a little bit, but I wanted to just have a follow-up on something that you just said, because in the book, you were very honest in the ways that you neglected your children. I think for a lot of us, we see ourselves in, we try to see ourselves in a positive light, but you were very honest about some of the things that you did. Did you worry about being judged or being misunderstood?
I did, for a little bit. I have worked very hard to be doing what I'm doing, and I did, wonder, would people be judging me or, questioning, my capability but it was so important to me to be authentic, to share these truths, because these truths are often just hidden away. They're brushed under the rug. We don't talk about them. And if they can't come to the surface, I don't really think that the healing or the understanding can come about for so many people. And even, when we talk about the intergenerational trauma or the impacts of things such as residential schools, our people didn't talk about them for years because it was too traumatic, or, there was violence, that came about, such as, racism and discrimination. I feel it's so important to speak truthfully and honestly. And I know that, it's helped other people. And when I have spoken, I have learned about others who have gone through things. Those have very much helped me, because then I think, man, if they could get through that, there's hope for me too.
And because some of your children are older, and I'm guessing they're able to, I don't know if they've read the book, but is this maybe a way for you to have that conversation, those painful conversations?
Absolutely. They have read the book. My son read it in a day, which was pretty amazing. And they've seen and experienced us going through some rough times growing up, but they also seen their mother who never gave up, their mother who kept striving, who kept fighting, and that is breaking the cycle. That is empowering for them, and they're really proud of me for that. So
in the book, you talk about how stubborn you are and how you have this fire, and you are indeed a fighter and a warrior. But as you wrote in the book, you continue to battle the challenges rooted in cycles of addiction, abuse, and violence. Even when you became an accomplished reporter, you write in the book, I'm talking world changer, history maker, badass, mother warrior stuff. But the question that plagued me was, how could I be doing so well in my professional life, but epically failing in my personal life? Do you have an answer to that question?
Like I said, this this journey of being successful as a journalist and earning these accolades and such like that. At the same time, I was on a hardcore inner journey of healing. And as my career was moving up and up, my healing necessarily wasn't happening at the same rate. And it was frustrating for me because I thought, oh, it's all going to be good once I get here and once this happens. But for me, I really believe that healing is a lifelong journey. And I'm still, going through that process. I'm still in counseling. I still need to do things. And even doing the work that I do, it's heavy, it's traumatic, going into a lot of these situations, dealing with, telling the stories of residential school survivors or meeting with families whose, daughters and sisters have been murdered or missing or, this is really hardcore stuff, right? And so it's a continual push to work through.
You mentioned the amount of work that you do, but also the impacts on it of, physically and emotionally it impacts you. How do you find a way to process those things? Because your life has been threatened and to move forward and tell these stories.
I just, I think a lot of it is prayer. I get through a lot of it, by prayer and just, this belief in what I'm doing, that it's right and that it's essential. Like, I believe that the work that I do is human rights work and that there are literally lives on the line. When I'm dealing with this stuff, there's been times when I'm on the road and I'm so impacted that I'll have to take sleeping pills because I'm experiencing nightmares and, different things. But I get a release somewhat when the stories are out there, when the stories are published or when they're broadcast and when they're, given to the world. So, I just deal with it with prayer, with, talking to elders that I know and just working through it as I go.
You write about intergenerational trauma that you experienced, yet you express so much love and empathy towards your mother and your family. How does your childhood and home life affect your approach to parenting your own children?
Oh, wow. Well, it's been hard. It's been a lot of, undoing, and that's a really tough question. It's different now. I have a 4-year-old now, and there's a large gap between her and my older kids. And back then, when I was raising my older kids, I was really in survival mode a lot. And they experienced a lot of, like me, having bouts of depression or, I would, yell and things like that. And now that I have a 4-year-old, it's so much different. I'm not in survival mode, and I am more healed, and I'm able to give to her that love and what she needs. It's not to say that I didn't give that to my other children. It was a different experience, but it was, I really didn't have a lot to pull from. And again, it was a creating and learning as I went.
One of my favorite chapters of the book is when you write about your cocoon, and you write about the struggles she went through, and you also write about the struggles that your parents went through. And even though you had a lot of challenges with your parents, you have that empathy, you have that love and that protection. Where do you find the peace to forgive in the ways that they didn't show up for you as parents?
Oh, wow. There was a lot of chaos, growing up. But there was a lot of love. We were rooted in that love. I may have felt lost. There may have, been times where I felt afraid or I wasn't at home and I was going back and forth with the foster care system, but we had those deep bonds of love. And I mean, I can't hold on to any of that poison of animosity or unforgiveness. I did go through that, through processing the anger, not really knowing, what it was. It was just reacting to those environments. But it's because I understand, and I give, grace for that. They didn't have the tools. They were working with what they had, to do the best that they could do. Their intention wasn't to hate or to harm. They worked with what they had, and so I think that's where, I draw from to forgive and to love.
And you also demonstrate that in your storytelling. Your mission has been to amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples, especially survivors of gender-based violence. How do you reconcile the ideas of activism and journalistic objectivity in that space?
Yeah, so, I didn't go to journalism school. I had a passion for it and learned on the ground and kind of did this grassroots. I didn't know that, journalists aren't supposed to, connect with the people necessarily that they're telling these stories. It was always about building relationships for me and, getting wholly involved with these people in order to draw these stories out. I think that the way that many storytellers go about, this job has to change, especially in marginalized or Indigenous communities. There's so much harm that's been done there, and we have to start from the ground up. We have to start with, breaking down these barriers and become authentic. Like, you can have objectivity, but these are human beings that we're dealing with. I take these stories extremely seriously, and I am invested in them, and I'm invested and care about these people and these places. It doesn't mean that I don't include the facts and do well, in what I do.
Your own journey of reconnection to your Indigenous bloodlines and culture evolved over time. I mean, the first few pages of the book, just the way you wrote it, just makes you just stop. You feel the tears coming down your face because you didn't even know where you came from. Why is there a lack of awareness among some children and grandchildren of residential school survivors of who they are and where they come from?
I mean, that is a part of that disconnect, right? And it was the goal of assimilation to, change our identities and to, snuff all of that out. And so you have these gaps in the generations. And I knew what it was to be Indigenous, but I only knew it at a certain level. I didn't know it. I didn't know that our family came from a place and had been displaced, not far from where I grew up. I didn't know the deep roots and the beauty and the richness of who we are. And again, just like people didn't talk about residential schools, it was forgotten. People didn't talk. The people were punished.
And when you say punished, I just want to interject because you found the writings of your Kukum, and she was talking about this this stress that she had after she passed on. She was going to hell because of who she was. So this stuff is really deeply ingrained.
Oh, absolutely. That's what they did. The churches in these schools, they drilled into the children that they were savages, and that if they didn't renounce their Indian heritage, that they would be damned to hell. And so this was a very real thing. Like, even my own Kukum, she was a devout Catholic till she died. And it was ingrained into her. Even though she was proud Native woman, it was this deeply ingrained into her to the end.
She had this worry. You lived in and out of foster homes from the age of 6 until you were 18 years old. According to Statistics Canada, more than half of the children in Canadian foster homes are Indigenous, despite them making up less than 8% of the country's child population. What does that say about where Canada is when we do talk about reconciliation?
It says that we're in a mess. It's plain and simple. We're in a mess, and this is the fallout. This is the fallout of all of that violence from the colonial agenda to the residential school to the 60s scoop to where we are now.
Does it break your heart? Because you were in those spaces and some of the things that you experienced at such a young age, 13, locked away for 6 months, the things that you experienced through there. And people don't know about that.
I mean, of course it does, and there's kids that are dying even in these systems now, in the foster care system, because we're so overrepresented, and our many of our people are lost, but things are changing. I do see hope. We are in a mess, but that trajectory is starting to change course finally.
Well, what role do you think journalism and storytelling play in truth and reconciliation?
Really huge, because the media has a major influence over societal perceptions and can help place pressure onto the different authorities and systems to help make change, or just bring general awareness to help get rid of racism and discrimination and hate. And so when our people aren't represented accurately or at all, then that is going to perpetuate a lot of this violence against our people, a lot of the racism and the stereotyping and this and that. So it plays a huge role to get it right.
And when we talk about, I just want to go back to that question about objectivity and activism. When we talk about separating your lived experience from these kind of stories, it's impossible. Do you think that that's a kind of a way to shut out certain people from covering certain stories?
I don't know, because something that's really interesting, sometimes people would say to me, well, you can't cover these stories because you're Indigenous. And I would say, well, why are you covering these mainstream stories? You're white. It's the same thing. They have that lived experience in their own communities, right? So for me, I don't see it that way.
And when the Pope came to visit Canada and give their apology to residential school survivors, to several major media outlets, you covered it.
Yeah.
Do you see that? How important was for you and the communities that you're representing for you to be able to do that in that moment?
It was important. That was a difficult assignment. Just a lot of very mixed feelings about that whole experience. But I was thankful. Well, I mean, it's really hard to take it seriously. It's hard to take it in. I mean, it's heavy as it is, following one of the most powerful men in the world, around the country. I had gone to Rome as well. And, wondering if this is authentic and what will happen out of it, and just dealing with the heaviness of the survivors and everything. But I knew that it was historic, and I was thankful for that. I was thankful to be able to document and witness and experience these survivors that some of them had prayed for this to happen, for years and years. So, in that sense, yes.
Well, you've been reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls for many years now. Have you seen changes and progress being made?
No, not in this genocide that we're in, no. No, not at all. We have the national inquiry that happened and their report that came out in 2019. Our women are still being murdered and going missing at like alarming rates. In Vancouver lately, there's been multiple Indigenous women, even over the past year, that have been murdered. One as young, I think, was 13 years old. It's not slowing down, and I don't believe that enough's being done about it.
You were one, in the book you say how you could have been one of those women and girls. When you cover these stories and you see the lack of movement on the issue, you think what?
I just keep pushing. I just keep doing what I do to get these stories out there.
It makes you more determined?
It makes me more determined, absolutely. I don't want to stop, and I just want to bring these faces to the forefront, that maybe these stories and these people would reverberate in the hearts of other people, that they would be moved to do something. Because, I always say, people say that, oh, if they knew what was going on in the residential school system at the time, when these children were being stolen from their families, when they were being experimented on and abused and even dying, that they would have done something. But I question that, because there's so many things that are happening right now, such as this genocide and other atrocities right now. And what are they doing?
In the book, you write that you're tired of being the hunted, that you are going to become the hunter. And in the book, you also write about all these people that you take care of. How do you take care of yourself?
Oh, wow. That's something that I'm learning every, as I go as well. Again, this work really drives me in everything that I do. I consider it a purpose. Again, I have a lot of prayer. I have people, supports that I get through, and just take it step by step.
And you're up for a huge award. You're receiving a huge award. Can you tell us that in our final moments?
Absolutely. So I learned recently that I won one of the most prestigious awards in the world for journalism, an Edward R. Murrow Award. And it was actually for my series with Al Jazeera English on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the Highway of Tears, and the correlations between the violence that industry brings in. And I'm going in a week to go to New York City to accept that award. And the reason why this is like massive is because we've been fighting for these stories to get to the mainstream for so many years. And to get this top award is huge. That is our voices coming to the forefront. So I'm gonna walk that red carpet.
You're going to shine on the red carpet.
Yes.
Congratulations. Everything that you've experienced in this book, so many people can get from. You almost gave up so many times, but you refused. You just kept moving forward. Congratulations on everything. And thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Hi. Thank you.
Right on. Stop share. Okay, I think we're back. Hope you all enjoyed that. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on it at all.
The reporter asked some really tough questions that I would think that are more for politicians, but she answered them really well.
Awesome. Well, thanks folks for coming tonight. It looks like we're kind of wrapped up here. So I appreciate you doing this book with us. And I think the next one is 113 Pathways to Justice, the government of Alberta look at the 94 calls to action. So I'm just going to quickly double check that before I let you all go. So September 11th will be our next date. And this 113 Pathways to Justice is an open document, so it is accessible for everybody to read, which means I should probably get my butt in order and order that Peace and Good for October 9th. I don't have a copy yet, so geez, I hope I better get on that right after this call. So anyway, thank you all for being on tonight, for listening to the interview, and I hope you enjoyed chatting about this book. It sounded like you all felt like it helped connect the dots of the issue of violence against Indigenous women. We've been really unpacking with the inquiry and with the TRC. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming.